back with me. NBC's Ryan Nobles reporting from Capitol Hill. Also joining us, former Democratic Senator of Missouri, Claire McCaskill, and former Republican Congressman of Florida, Carlos Curbelo. Both are MSNBC political analysts who have witness certifications. Here in studio, Jeremy Peters, New York Times national reporter, and Michael Hardaway, former communications director for Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Thank you all so much for watching this along with me. And Claire, we were speaking before we went into that certification process about how we are very much a divided country. 75 million people plus change voted for Kamala Harris, 77 million for Donald Trump, but it was not a majority. She has called Donald Trump a fascist. She has said that he would abuse the powers of the presidency, and she warned he should never again stand behind the seal of President of the United States. And I think it is reasonable to suspect that many of those 75 million Americans who voted for her feel much the same way, Claire. So as we witness what we just saw, for those people who feel as Kamala Harris does, for Democrats, former colleagues of yours who are in Congress, and for just voters, what is their role now in preserving and protecting this democracy going forward?
Well, it's going to be interesting. John Thune has a big job because he has already said very clearly that he wants to protect the filibuster. He wants to require 60 votes for changes in policy. They will have the ability, with a simple majority, to continue the Trump tax cuts for the very wealthy in this country. They will have an opportunity to spend more money on border security, which, frankly, I think will have some bipartisan support in a reconciliation bill that only requires a simple majority. But, you know, here's the thing, Chris, that we've got to remember. What happened 4 years ago, Donald Trump did not pay a political price for it. And I know that's awkward and uncomfortable and frankly depressing in many ways, but it's true. If you would have asked me 4 years ago if Donald Trump could ever get elected again on this day, I would say no. In fact, if you would have asked me many times during the last 4 years if Donald Trump could get elected again, I would have said no. But the American people, by a slim majority, said, yes, we're going to give him another shot because we're not happy with the status quo. And whether Kamala Harris liked it or not, she represented the status quo. And that was not what the American people wanted. I don't think the majority of America wanted Donald Trump again, but they just didn't want more of the same.
So here's where we are, Jeremy, and I think Claire makes a great point, but there are many Republicans, there are many Americans who still believe Joe Biden was an illegitimate president. Donald Trump has never conceded that election. And just this morning, speaking of January 6th in particular, Republican Congressman Mike Collins falsely posted that this was 4 years ago, thousands of peaceful grandmothers taking a self-guided, albeit unauthorized tour of the U.S. Capitol building. So what does that bode moving forward?
Well, the rewriting of the history of January 6th represents Donald Trump's complete dominance of the Republican Party, not just his dominance, but his ability to bend it and its politicians, its decision makers, to his will, to his lies. I mean, Claire is exactly right. There were many people who thought after January 6th that he didn't stand a chance. He was politically dead. You know who those people included? Many Republicans, like Kevin McCarthy, like Mitch McConnell. There were people who feared for their lives in that House chamber where Kamala Harris just presided over the certification. Trump's doctor at the time, Ronnie Jackson, who is now a congressman from Texas, was standing there with a flagpole he was using in case he needed to wield it as a spear or a club against the rioters that were ready to burst through the House chamber doors. I mean, and this congressman now is just like the other Republicans who insist that January 6th actually wasn't really that big of a deal, that the media and the Democrats have blown it out of proportion. And, you know, sadly, that is the alternate reality that exists in our political system right now, and it's a sign of how deeply divided this country remains. But I think also how many Americans are willing to really kind of deny that the kind of politics that Trump represents is corrosive to our democracy and corrosive to what holds the country and our political system together.
Michael, you were nodding, and I think that's such a great point. It's one thing to talk about a divided country. We've had a lot of close elections in the past. We've had a lot of divided countries. In fact, you could argue that a divided country is part of democracy, right? That people are going to have exchanges of ideas. They feel very differently about any given issue. This is different. This is denying reality. Not just what Claire said, that many people would be shocked to have thought 4 years ago after what we saw happen at the Capitol, that Donald Trump could be reelected, but that Ronnie Jackson could be elected, that so many members of Congress who were there that day and refused to certify, voted against certifying, didn't want to certify the election of Donald Trump, would be reelected. So when President Biden today warned about what we were seeing and said the old adage that those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it, what are we to make of what we saw?
That's right. I mean, the biggest issue of this era is not right versus left. It's truth versus lies. There are millions of Americans who just don't believe basic facts they read in the Washington Post or what happened on January the 6th. And the president-elect is essentially gaslighting us into saying what you saw didn't happen. So believe me instead of your lying eyes. And I think that is the biggest challenge that we as a party and as a country face.
Congressman, today, Senator Adam Schiff invited Daniel Hodges to the Capitol. Most people will remember him. He's a police officer who was attacked, who was crushed in the doorway during the riot, as you see. And I want to play what he said about attending the certification.
It's be my honor to make it as uncomfortable as possible for the GOP members who try to whitewash that day and lie about what happened and pretend that we didn't save them.
174 Republicans voted to overturn Donald Trump's election loss in 2021. 8 of those senators are currently in office. So, Congressman, are 139 House Republicans. Do you think they'll be uncomfortable?
Well, look, I think any time that you're dealing with one of the darkest days in American history for those who had a role in that, even if it was a minor role, certainly it has to be uncomfortable. But, Chris, I think today is a day not only to remember the horrors of 4 years ago, but also to celebrate the fact that the losers of this election, the outgoing administration, in this case, have reminded Americans of what this day should be, a celebration of democracy. The reason that so many people have come to this country since its inception, including my family, seeking political stability, the rule of law, respect for institutions, accepting election results. Today, we are reminded of why we are the greatest nation in the world. And just like we had to learn lessons from January 6th 4 years ago, I think we also have to learn lessons and take from today and celebrate the fact that we are back on track as a country. Of course, we have to remain vigilant, but we had a peaceful transfer of power the way it should be, thanks to those who lost the election.
Michael, your old boss, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, appeared to take a little dig at his Republican colleagues after Friday's Speaker election, and I want to play that for you.
2 months ago, the American people elected Donald Trump as the 47th President of the United States of America. Thank you for that very generous applause. It's okay. There are no election deniers on our side of the aisle.
Look, this is something that Democrats leaned into in November. Mm-hmm. It didn't seem to be successful as a message, but is it something that they can continue to talk about, should talk about, or put aside?
I think the reality is that we have to focus on our message, which is what we do for working Americans, and the idea that prices are too high and how the party is going to address that and a litany of other issues. Those pocketbook issues, as a message, should be the focus for Democrats over the next 2 years.